She was just 7, fragile, feverish, barefoot on marble floors that gleamed colder than her father's heart. Each morning, Grace woke up not to cartoons or cereal, but to the weight of a broom too big for her tiny hands. In a mansion dripping with chandeliers and silence, the only voice that ever acknowledged her existence was the one that barked orders and never asked, "Are you okay?" Her only friend, a dog named Cooper. And one night, when the storm rolled in and the walls of the Beaumont estate echoed with something more than thunder, that dog did something no one saw coming. Have you ever seen kindness come from where no one expected it? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and watch how it all went down. The cavernous main hall of Beaumont Manor was a landscape of chilling grandeur, its marble floors stretching away like a frozen lake, reflecting the weak, hesitant light of early dawn that filtered through towering, arched windows. 7-year-old Grace, a painfully thin child whose large, sorrowful eyes seemed to carry the weight of unspoken grief, wrestled with a heavy, long-handled broom. Its bristles scraped tiredly against the polished stone, the sound echoing unnaturally in the vast, empty space. Each sweep sent a dull ache through her already sore back, a dry, hacking cough, one she desperately tried to muffle in the crook of her arm, still managed to escape her lips, each spasm shaking her narrow shoulders and sending a fresh wave of dizziness through her head. Dark, bruised-looking circles lay starkly beneath her eyes, a testament to chronic exhaustion and fitful, insufficient sleep on a thin, lumpy pallet in the damp manor storeroom. Her stomach, a tight, hollow knot, rumbled insistently, a painful reminder of its emptiness. If only I had a piece of bread, she thought, a familiar, desperate litany of longing. Just one tiny crust. Even a crumb from Father's enormous breakfast tray would be a feast. Fleeting, hazy images, like fragments of a half-forgotten dream, flickered through her mind, a warm, gentle embrace that smelled of lavender and sunshine, a soft, melodious laugh, the simple, shared joy of meals eaten together in a small, sunlit kitchen far from this opulent prison. These precious, painful memories of her mother, Eleanor, stood in stark, agonizing contrast to the bleak, loveless reality of her present. Her back throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, a constant companion born from nights spent on the unforgiving, cold cement floor of the storeroom. It felt, as it did every morning, as if 1,000 tiny, icy needles were pricking relentlessly at her spine. The rhythmic click of expensive leather shoes on the polished mahogany treads of the grand staircase announced his approach. Victor Beaumont descended like a predatory bird from its eyrie, a figure of cold, immaculate perfection. His bespoke suit, the color of charcoal, bore no hint of a wrinkle, its severe lines emphasizing his tall, unyielding frame. His sharp, assessing eyes, the color of glacial ice, swept across the expansive hall, pausing on Grace with an expression of profound distaste, as if she were an unsightly piece of lint on the otherwise pristine canvas of his domain. Sloppy. His voice, devoid of any trace of warmth or paternal affection, cracked through the pre-dawn silence like a whip, making Grace jump. The main hall must gleam like a mirror before the sun is fully risen. Or do you intend for my guests, people of the highest societal standing? I'll have you know, to witness this sty you seem intent on creating. Grace coughed again, a small, involuntary sound she couldn't quite stifle, her hand flying to her mouth too late. Victor's eyes narrowed to icy slits. That sound again, he snapped, his voice laced with contempt. Don't you dare feign illness to shirk your duties. I have absolutely no time, nor patience, for your cheap, childish theatrics. I have made it abundantly clear, have I not, That weakness in any form has no place within the walls of this house. He shot a pointed, irritated glance at the ornate gold wristwatch adorning his cuff. See that it is done, and done properly, unless you wish for a more intimate reacquaintance with the cold storeroom floor tonight. And remember, his voice dropped to a menacing, sibilant hiss that made Grace's blood run cold. You are not to soil my Persian rug with your filthy implements. Grace's gaze, desperate for any sliver of comfort, inadvertently flickered towards the massive, arched French doors that led to the manicured gardens. Outside, Cooper, her beloved Rottweiler, her only true friend in this desolate world, often sat watching her with an almost human sadness in his deep brown eyes. Victor, whose senses seemed unnaturally attuned to any sign of what he considered her weaknesses, caught the fleeting movement instantly. "That dog again," he snarled, the polished veneer of his composure cracking to reveal the raw irritation beneath. His expensive shoes clicked sharply and angrily on the marble as he strode purposefully towards her, his shadow falling over her like a physical weight. How many times must I repeat myself? Grace, you are not to waste your time, or what little energy you possess, mooning over that beast. It does nothing but dig up my flower beds and dirty my entire garden. Or perhaps, his lip curled into a sneer, you see yourself as one of its kind, a stray, a discard. No, I didn't, Grace whispered, her voice barely audible, trembling like a trapped bird, her eyes downcast, fixed on the swirling patterns of the marble floor. Victor let out a harsh, contemptuous bark of laughter that held no humor, only scorn. You didn't. Don't lie to me. Girl, look at yourself. Ragged, unkempt, filthy. You're hardly an improvement on it. Are you? It seems the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Like mother, like daughter. Utterly, thoroughly useless. He delivered the words with a deliberate, sadistic cruelty, twisting the knife of her mother's loss with evident relish. He adjusted the knot of his silk tie, his composure restored, his voice returning to its usual icy control. Tonight, I am hosting an extremely important dinner engagement with Senator Albright and his wife. You will not, under any circumstances, do anything to jeopardize my affairs. Everything in this house must be perfect. Do you understand me? Absolutely perfect. With that final, chilling decree, he turned on his heel and strode towards his private study, perhaps to engage in one of his many tents, demanding long-distance business calls, leaving Grace adrift in a fresh wave of misery, completely oblivious or, more likely, deliberately indifferent to the silent tears that now welled in his daughter's desolate eyes. Cooper, a magnificent Rottweiler with a broad, noble head and intelligent, soulful brown eyes that seemed to reflect Grace's own quiet sorrow, was indeed outside, his powerful, muscular body pressed as close as he could get to the cold glass of the French doors. He watched Grace with an almost human expression of profound, empathetic understanding. Victor had long ago, in a fit of pique, after Cooper had supposedly ruined a prize-winning rosebush, though Grace suspected it was more because the dog had been Eleanor's cherished companion, banned him from setting foot inside the house, contemptuously referring to him as a filthy, destructive animal. This edict was a bitter pill for Cooper, who had adored Grace's mother and now transferred that fierce loyalty to her equally gentle daughter. His only interactions with Grace were stolen, furtive moments, fraught with the risk of Victor's discovery. When her father wasn't looking, Grace would sometimes manage to sneak him a dry crust of bread saved from her own meager non-meals, or a leftover bone from the kitchen refuse, her heart aching at his unjust exile. He saw her now, small, defeated, and trembling in the vast emptiness of the hall. His thick, stubby tail gave a faint, hopeful thump against the cold stone patio when her tear-filled eyes finally met his through the glass. His ears, usually alert, drooped slightly, expectantly. When Victor's harsh, cutting words had rained down on her, Cooper had let out a low, mournful whimper, a sound of shared pain, and had, lightly, almost tentatively, scratched at the thick glass pane with one of his heavy paws, a desperate, futile gesture of comfort and solidarity, once driven by an overwhelming need to be near her when she had been particularly distressed. He had managed to slip inside when a delivery man had carelessly left the kitchen service door ajar. His joy at reaching her side had been short-lived. Victor, discovering him nuzzling Grace's tear-stained face, had erupted in a volcanic rage, grabbing Cooper roughly by the collar and dragging him, yelping and struggling, back outside, his furious shouts echoing through the entire manor, promising the direst of consequences if the dog ever dared to transgress again. In the distant, gleaming expanse of the kitchen, Mrs. Gable, the stout, kind-faced woman who served as both cook and reluctant head housekeeper in the chronically understaffed manor, was meticulously arranging Victor's extravagant breakfast on a heavy silver tray, sizzling strips of thick-cut, artisanal bacon, golden, flaky croissants undoubtedly imported from France, a delicate china pot of freshly brewed, single-origin coffee whose rich aroma filled the air, a stark, almost obscene contrast to the gnawing, cramping hunger that was Grace's constant companion. Her eyes, when they briefly, accidentally, met Grace's as the child passed the kitchen doorway on some new, urgent errand for her father, were filled with a pained, quickly veiled mixture of profound pity and helpless frustration. She made a subtle point of leaving slightly more scraps than usual on the large wooden preparation table, the trimmed ends of vegetables, the heel of a loaf, hoping against hope that Grace might find a clandestine opportunity to snatch them later. That man, he's a heartless devil, Mrs. Gable thought, her hands clenching the dough she was kneading for the evening's dinner rolls with unnecessary, frustrated force. And that poor, sweet child. She's the spitting image of her mother, gentle Eleanor, ground down to dust by his relentless, icy coldness. She remembered Eleanor's quiet grace, her innate kindness, the way her smile could light up a room. A fleeting, rebellious flicker of defiance sparked within Mrs. Gable's usually timid heart, but the ever-present, suffocating fear of Victor's swift and merciless retribution, of losing her livelihood and the small, grim security it provided, quickly, inevitably, doused it. She had tried, once, long ago, to meekly suggest that perhaps Miss Grace seemed a trifle unwell and might benefit from a day of rest. Her tentative words were met with an icy glare from Victor that had frozen her to the spot, and a curt, dismissive, "Mind your own damn business, Gable, unless you wish to find yourself without one." The memory still made her shiver. The breathtaking opulence of Beaumont Manor was nothing more than a gilded cage, its luxurious, museum-quality furnishings and sprawling, echoing rooms only serving to emphasize the chilling, pervasive absence of genuine love, warmth, or human kindness. Victor's lavish, solitary meals were a daily, silent mockery of Grace's desperate hunger. Only Cooper's unwavering, silent, and exiled devotion offered any solace, any fragile bulwark against Victor's relentless, soul-crushing cruelty. As the long, arduous morning wore relentlessly on, after another particularly vicious torrent of bitter reproaches from Victor regarding some imagined imperfection in her polishing of the family silver, Grace finally retreated to the cold, damp sanctuary of the deserted scullery, leaning against the rough stone wall, hidden for a precious few moments from her father's sight. The tears she had fought so hard to suppress finally traced hot, silent paths down her dirt-smudged, hollow cheeks. Outside the small, grimy scullery window, Cooper stood his faithful sentinel, his broad, noble head resting on his massive paws, his deep chest vibrating with a soft, heartbroken whimper that seemed to meld with her own silent, desperate sobs, a shared chorus of sorrow in a world that offered little else. In the kitchen, Mrs. Gable paused in her relentless preparations for the evening's grand affair, her gnarled hands clasped tightly over her spotless white apron, a silent, fervent prayer on her lips, a heavy, suffocating weight of helplessness pressing down on her spirit, and looming over all of them, casting a long, dark shadow, was the oppressive, inescapable weight of the critically important dinner party Victor Beaumont was hosting that evening, an event he had decreed, with chilling, absolute finality, must be, in his own carefully chosen words, absolutely perfect, the unspoken, unbearable burden of achieving that impossible perfection, Grace knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, would fall squarely and crushingly on her small, already overburdened, and rapidly failing shoulders. The evening of Senator Albright's dinner party descended upon Beaumont Manor like a velvet shroud, heavy with unspoken tensions and glittering with a brittle, superficial elegance. Grace, her small body already aching from the morning's relentless labors and an escalating fever that made her head spin, was thrust into the role of an undersized, ghost-like attendant, dressed in a plain, dark frock that hung loosely on her thin frame. She was tasked with circulating amongst the chattering, bejeweled guests with trays of hors d'oeuvres, her hands trembling so violently she feared dropping everything. The oppressive heat of the crowded ballroom, thick with expensive perfume and cigar smoke, made her breathing even more shallow, and each suppressed cough felt like a hammer blow to her ribs. Laughter, the clinking of crystal glasses, and the murmur of self-important conversations swirled around her. A dizzying, overwhelming cacophony. She navigated the throng, her eyes downcast, desperately trying to remain invisible. Then, it happened, as she offered a tray to a booming, red-faced man who gestured too enthusiastically. Her trembling hand faltered. The silver tray tilted precariously. A crystal champagne flute wobbled, then crashed to the polished parquet floor with a sickening, sharp chong that sliced through the ambient noise like a gunshot. A sudden, dead silence fell upon the immediate vicinity. Every eye, it seemed, turned towards Grace. She froze, her face instantly draining of all color, becoming a stark, terrified white. The glittering shards of glass at her feet seemed to mirror the shattering of her own fragile composure. Victor Beaumont, who had been holding court with the senator, materialized at her side with terrifying speed. His face, moments before, wreathed in a practiced, convivial smile for his guests, hardened into a mask of controlled fury. He offered a short, dismissive laugh. "Oh, it seems we have a rather clumsy little girl here," he announced to the onlookers, his voice smooth as oiled silk, yet with an underlying edge that made Grace's blood run cold. "My sincerest apologies. Ladies and gentlemen, children, you know." He made a gesture of wry exasperation. Then, leaning down, his smile becoming a terrifying, predatory grimace meant only for her, he hissed through clenched teeth, his breath hot and reeking faintly of expensive brandy against her ears. "You will pay dearly for this damned, idiotic clumsiness. You little rat! Just you wait. You have embarrassed me, and that is a transgression I do not forgive easily." Straightening up, he addressed the guests again, his voice now laced with a cutting sarcasm that he attempted to pass off as droll parental indulgence. "My daughter, ladies and gentlemen," he said, with a slight, theatrical flourish of his hand towards Grace, who stood rooted to the spot in abject terror. "She is in the process of learning how to serve. It appears more, shall we say, rigorous lessons are needed for her to become a proper, presentable young lady. A few of his cronies chuckled sycophantically. Grace wished the floor would swallow her whole. The rest of the interminable party passed in a blur of agonizing fear and worsening illness for Grace. Finally, as the last of the guests departed, their cars crunching on the gravel driveway, Victor, his face still a thundercloud, summoned her. The superficial charm he'd worn for his guests had vanished, replaced by an icy, implacable rage. "The gardens," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "The west lawn is littered with debris from the preparations. It needs to be cleared. Now." A glance outside the tall windows revealed a sky bruised purple and black, the wind beginning to howl ominously, whipping the trees into a tormented frenzy. A storm, a big one, was clearly moments away from breaking. "Father?" Grace began, her voice a mere thread, her body shaking uncontrollably with chills despite the stuffy heat of the house. "Please, I feel so very cold and tired. I think I have a fever." Victor's lips curled into a faint, cruel smile that did not reach his eyes. "Cold? Are you?" he drawled, savoring her fear. "A bit of hard work in the fresh air will soon warm you up. Or perhaps," his voice dropped to a silken threat, "you'd prefer the more consistent warmth of the dark storeroom. Alone, with the rats. The choice, as always, is yours. My dear," he gestured towards the garden door. "Get to it." With no choice, Grace stumbled out into the rapidly deteriorating weather. The first fat drops of rain began to fall as she dragged a heavy wicker basket across the lawn, her small hands fumbling with fallen decorations and stray champagne corks. The wind tore at her thin dress, and the rain quickly plastered her lank hair to her scalp. Her cough returned with a vengeance, each spasm tearing at her lungs, leaving her gasping and dizzy. The world around her seemed to sway and tilt with the force of the wind and her own debilitating sickness. Despair, cold and absolute, settled over her. She worried about Cooper, hoping he'd found shelter from the storm's fury. Victor Beaumont, meanwhile, retreated to the covered balcony overlooking the west lawn, a glass of expensive whiskey in hand. He stood watching his daughter's small, struggling figure battling the elements below, a grim, solitary silhouette against the darkening, storm-lashed landscape. A portly man, one of Victor's last remaining business associates from the party, joined him, looking down with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. "The girl needs to be taught discipline, Henderson," Victor stated, his voice cool and dispassionate as he swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "Such pronounced weakness, such fragility. It has no place in the world we inhabit. It must be excised, cauterized from the bud. Her mother, you see, coddled her excessively, a fatal flaw." He took a long sip of his whiskey, his eyes never leaving Grace. Mrs. Gable, her heart aching, had watched Grace being sent out into the storm. She could bear it no longer. Fetching a thick, if somewhat threadbare, shawl, she hurried to the balcony door. "Mr. Beaumont, sir, please," she implored, her voice trembling but urgent. "The child, she'll catch her death out there. The storm is truly terrible. Let her come inside. I beg you." Victor turned slowly, his eyes like chips of ice. "Mrs. Gable," he roared, his voice cutting through the howl of the wind. "Who, precisely, gave you the unmitigated audacity to interfere in my private family affairs? Or are you, perhaps, tired of your employment here? Do you wish for a more immediate taste of the storm yourself? Without a roof over your head, you will mind your own damn business. Woman, If you don't wish to find yourself out on the street before the night is through, she won't die. She's more resilient than she looks. Unfortunately, he dismissed her with a contemptuous wave of his hand, defeated for the moment, but with a new, desperate resolve hardening within her. Mrs. Gable retreated. Later, when she saw Victor engrossed in what sounded like a heated, unsatisfactory telephone call in his study, his voice raised in anger about some failed merger or stock market loss, she seized her chance, grabbing an old, waterproofed canvas coat that belonged to Samuel, the gardener, a thermos of warm milk sweetened with honey, and a precious fever-reducing tablet she kept for her own ailments. She slipped out the kitchen door. She found Grace huddled beneath a large, dripping rhododendron bush, soaked to the bone, shivering violently, her small face ashen. Cooper was there, pressed close against her, trying to shield her with his own body, his fur dark and matted with rain, whining softly in distress. "Child! Oh, you poor, poor child," Mrs. Gable whispered, her voice thick with tears as she draped the coat around Grace's trembling shoulders. "Here, drink this. Quickly now, before he sees." Her own hands were shaking as she helped Grace sip the warms, sweet milk and swallow the tablet. It was at that moment that Victor, his business call apparently concluded and his mood fouler than ever, strode out onto the terrace, perhaps to survey the storm's damage. His eyes, sharp and unforgiving, instantly spotted them. "You dare!" he bellowed, his face contorting, flushing a dangerous, apoplectic red. His fury, already simmering from his business woes, now found its target. "And you, too, Grace. You dare to defy me, to sneak about behind my back, colluding with the staff to oppose my will. Are you, and this damn, infernal dog." His gaze fell upon a heavy, decorative ironwood cane leaning against the terrace wall. He snatched it up, his knuckles white, and took a menacing step towards them. The cane raised. "I'll teach you all a lesson you won't soon forget." Before the cane could fall, Grace, with a surge of adrenaline born of terror for her beloved Cooper, lurched forward, placing her small, frail body directly between the dog and her enraged father. "No, don't hurt him," she cried, her voice surprisingly strong. Cooper, seeing the threat to Grace, erupted in a volley of deep, ferocious barks, his lips drawn back in a snarl, ready to defend her even if it cost him his life. The sight of his daughter defending the dog, combined with Cooper's defiance, pushed Victor over the edge. With a roar of pure rage, he grabbed Grace by her thin arm, his fingers digging into her flesh like talons, and roughly dragged her, stumbling and sobbing, back towards the house, towards the dreaded storeroom. Cooper lunged after them, barking furiously, but Victor slammed the heavy terrace door in his face. He hauled Grace through the darkened service corridors, his grip merciless. Reaching the storeroom, he thrust her inside with such force that she stumbled and fell heavily onto the cold stone floor. The key grated harshly in the old lock. "Let's see how long your stubbornness, and that of your wretched dog, lasts in here." Victor's voice, muffled but still terrifying, came from the other side of the door. "You'll stay there until you learn some damn sense and some respect." His heavy footsteps receded, leaving Grace alone in the suffocating, terrifying darkness. Outside, Cooper, frantic with grief and rage, began to tear at the door, his powerful claws scraping and splintering the wood, his barks devolving into choked, desperate howls that were almost lost in the escalating fury of the storm. Mrs. Gable, who had watched the entire horrifying scene unfold, stood frozen by the kitchen window, tears streaming down her face, her body trembling with a mixture of terror and a new, unfamiliar rage. The sight of Grace being dragged away, the sound of that lock turning, had finally shattered the last vestiges of her fear-induced passivity. No, she thought, her hands clenching into fists, her knuckles white. No, I cannot. I will not let this go on any longer. I have to do something. That sweet child. She'll die in there. She'll die, just like her mother. Her gaze, filled with a desperate, burgeoning resolve, darted towards the old-fashioned telephone mounted on the kitchen wall, then back towards the distant, dreadful storeroom door, now only a dark rectangle in the storm-swept night. A terrible, risky plan began to form in her mind, a desperate gamble with impossibly high stakes. The choice was terrifying, but the alternative was unthinkable. The storeroom was a black, suffocating tomb. Grace lay curled in a tight ball on the icy, damp cement floor, her thin dress, still soaked from the earlier downpour, clinging to her like a shroud. The fever that had been simmering all day now raged unchecked, a consuming inferno that burned through her small, depleted reserves. Her world had dissolved into a chaotic swirl of terrifying, disjointed images and agonizing sensations. Shadows danced in the oppressive darkness, morphing into monstrous shapes that seemed to lunge at her from the corners of her vision. She was adrift in a delirium, a terrifying sea of fragmented memories and burning pain. Her mother's face, soft and gentle, would flicker before her eyes, then dissolve into the leering countenance of her father. She felt the phantom touch of a kind hand, heard a whispered lullaby, only to have it snatched away by Victor's harsh, booming commands. "Mommy," she whimpered, the sound a raw, desperate plea lost in the vast, echoing silence. Her small hands clutched at her chest as another coughing fit tore through her, each spasm feeling as if her lungs were being ripped apart. "I miss you. Cooper. Please, Cooper, save me." Her breath hitched, shallow and erratic, so cold. My back. It hurts so much. Her heartbeat, once a frantic drum against her ribs, was now a faint, fluttering whisper, threatening to fade away altogether. Outside the heavy, bolted door, Cooper was a creature possessed. He had hurled himself against the unyielding oak until his shoulders were bruised, clawed at the wood until his paws were raw and bleeding, the sharp, coppery scent of it mingling with the damp earthiness of the storm. His barks, initially furious and demanding, had devolved into long, mournful, deeply resonant howls that pierced the night, each one a desperate, unanswered cry for help, an appeal to an indifferent universe. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that Grace was fading. Victor Beaumont, in his plush, distant master suite, either slept the oblivious sleep of the callous or, more likely, deliberately ignored the dog's frantic serenade, dismissing it as yet another of the animal's irritating disturbances. But Cooper did not give up. Suddenly, as if a new thought, a desperate strategy had pierced his canine grief, he fell silent. He remembered Mrs. Gable. He remembered her scent, the furtive kindness in her eyes, the gentle hand that had sometimes offered him a forbidden scrap. With renewed, focused energy, he spun from the storeroom door and raced through the darkened, echoing service corridors of the manor, his paws padding silently on the cold stone. His objective clear, he reached the small, unassuming door to Mrs. Gable's modest room in the staff quarters. He didn't hesitate. He scratched, not tentatively, but with a fierce, demanding urgency, his claws tearing at the painted wood. He barked again, sharp, staccato bursts, loud and insistent, a relentless alarm designed to penetrate the deepest sleep. He pawed, he barked, he threw his weight against the door, a desperate, four-legged siege engine. Inside, Mrs. Gable, startled from a fitful, worried sleep, sat bolt upright in her narrow bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling. The only answer was Cooper's frantic, insistent barking and scratching. A terrible premonition, cold and sharp, pierced through her drowsiness. She fumbled for her robe, her hands shaking. When she finally unlatched the door, Cooper practically fell into the room. His eyes, wild and pleading, were fixed on hers. He seized the hem of her flannel nightgown in his strong, gentle jaws and tugged, not roughly, but with an undeniable, desperate insistence, pulling her towards the hallway. His entire body quivering with a terrible urgency, he whined, a low, continuous, heartbreaking sound, then looked pointedly down the corridor in the direction of the distant storeroom. A wave of icy dread washed over Mrs. Gable. She didn't need words to understand. Grace, following the frantic, determined Rottweiler, her own bare feet slapping softly on the cold floor, she hurried towards the storeroom. As they drew closer, she could hear it, a faint, almost inaudible moan, so weak it was nearly swallowed by the receding rumble of the storm. It was Grace, pressing her ear to the cold, damp wood of the door. Mrs. Gable's blood ran cold. The child was alive, but barely. Her mind raced. Victor, his rage, the locked door. But then, another image superimposed itself, Eleanor's gentle, fading smile. Grace's small, trusting face, now ashen and drawn. The internal battle was fierce, but mercifully brief. The years of fear, of cowed submission, fractured, then shattered, replaced by a desperate, galvanizing courage she hadn't known she possessed. "Dr. Anderson," she whispered. The name, a sudden inspiration. He was an acquaintance of Victor's, sometimes a guest at the manor, an older man with kind eyes and a reputation for quiet integrity, for possessing a moral compass that seemed strangely out of place in Victor's orbit. He was their only hope. Her hands trembling so violently she could barely dial. Mrs. Gable made her way to the old-fashioned telephone in the main kitchen. Cooper stayed pressed close against her legs, a warm, reassuring presence in the terrifying darkness. The dial tone seemed deafening in the silence. "Dr. Anderson's residence," a sleepy voice answered on the third ring. "Dr. Anderson, please," Mrs. Gable began, forcing her voice to remain steady, though her heart felt as if it would pound its way out of her chest. "This is Gable, Mr. Victor Beaumont's housekeeper. Forgive me for calling at such an ungodly hour, but the master has an urgent request. It's his daughter, Grace. She doesn't seem too well, doctor. A very high fever, and she's coughing a great deal. He asked if you could possibly come right away. Mr. Beaumont also mentioned that this needs to be kept very quiet to avoid any undue trouble or fuss for the family." Each lie felt like a lead weight on her tongue, but Grace's life depended on it. A pause. Then Dr. Anderson's voice, gravelly with sleep, but instantly alert. "Beaumont's girl. Yes, of course. I'll be there as soon as I can. 20 minutes. Perhaps less. The longest 20 minutes of Mrs. Gable's life. Next, the key. She knew Victor kept a spare set for the entire manor hidden in his study. Tiptoeing through the darkened, silent house, Cooper padding silently beside her like a four-legged shadow, his senses on high alert, she reached the imposing oak door of Victor's domain. The air inside was stale, tinged with the faint, sickly sweet aroma of stale brandy and expensive cigars. Victor was sprawled in his large leather armchair, snoring softly, a near-empty decanter on the table beside him. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. With painstaking care, Cooper standing guard at the doorway, his head cocked, listening for any sound. She searched the massive desk, her fingers fumbling through drawers until they closed around a heavy ring of keys. Back at the storeroom, her hands shook so much it took 3 attempts to fit the old, tarnished key into the lock. The bolt slid back with a sickening groan. She pushed the heavy door inward. The stench of mildew, damp earth, and something else, the cloying smell of sickness, hit her like a physical blow. In the flickering beam of the flashlight she'd grabbed from the kitchen, the sight that greeted her made her gasp and press a hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. Grace lay utterly still, her small face a ghastly, bluish white, her lips cracked and dry. Her skin, when Mrs. Gable dared to touch her forehead, was burning like a furnace. Oh, my sweet Lord. Grace, child, working with Cooper, who gently licked Grace's unresponsive hand, nudging her face with his wet nose. Mrs. Gable did what little she could. She carefully wiped Grace's face and neck with a damp cloth she'd brought, murmuring soft, comforting words, trying desperately to rouse her, to elicit any sign of life, while praying for the doctor's swift arrival. Headlights finally swept across the rain-lashed driveway. Dr. Anderson, a man in his late 50s with a kind, weary face and silver-streaked hair, looked surprised and then deeply concerned when a visibly distraught Mrs. Gable, not Victor, opened the massive front door to him. She's in here, Doctor. Mrs. Gable whispered, leading him quickly towards the storeroom. The moment Dr. Anderson saw Grace, his professional composure masked a wave of shock and rising anger. He knelt, his examination swift, efficient, but gentle. The story Mrs. Gable poured out between ragged sobs, a litany of neglect, cruelty, and deliberate indifference, painted a horrifying picture. Severe pneumonia. Dr. Anderson pronounced finally, his voice grim, his kind eyes filled with a mixture of pity and outrage. She's critically malnourished. Doctor, her breathing is dangerously shallow. Her lungs have distinct rales, and her heartbeat, it's frighteningly weak and erratic. This child needs to be in a hospital, under intensive care, immediately. Why in God's name? How could how could any father allow his child to reach such a state? This is criminal neglect. The commotion, the hurried footsteps, the urgent, hushed voices, the beam of Dr. Anderson's flashlight cutting through the darkness, finally penetrated Victor Beaumont's alcohol-induced stupor. He appeared at the storeroom doorway, his expensive silk robe askew, his hair disheveled, his face a mask of sleepy, irritable confusion that quickly morphed into outright fury. What in the blazes is all this infernal racket in the middle of the night? He bellowed, his voice thick with sleep and annoyance, his bloodshot eyes focused on the doctor. Anderson, what in God's name are you doing in my house at this ungodly hour? And Gable, his glare shifted to the housekeeper, venomous and threatening. What in the living hell do you think you're doing in this room with her? Dr. Anderson rose slowly to his full height, his face set in stern, disapproving lines. Victor, your daughter is critically ill. Victor let out a harsh, dismissive scoff. Gravely ill. Don't be absurd. Anderson, she's just a consummate, infuriating little actress. Always has been. A troublesome, weak-willed thing. Constantly seeking attention. She's probably trying to shirk her duties again. The lazy brat. I know her type. You should leave. Anderson, don't let her, or this meddling old woman, deceive you. This is no act. Victor. Doctor, Anderson retorted, his voice steely. She has acute pneumonia. She's burning with fever, severely dehydrated, and profoundly neglected. She needs immediate hospitalization, or she may not survive the night. Victor's face flushed an ugly, Mottled red, what I do in my own house, with my own daughter, is my business, and mine alone, he roared. She is my flesh and blood. She needs to learn discipline, not coddling. Now, I'll thank you to leave my property immediately. The confrontation had reached its zenith. The air in the small, damp storeroom crackled with a terrifying, palpable tension. Dr. Anderson stood his ground, his expression unyielding. He reached into his coat pocket and calmly withdrew his cell phone. I cannot, in good conscience, allow a child to die because of your monumental arrogance, your indifference, and your blatant cruelty. Victor, he stated, his voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of authority. Either you give me your unequivocal permission to transport Grace for emergency medical treatment right now, this very instant, or I will call the county sheriff and report you for criminal child abuse and neglect. The choice is yours. As if on cue, Cooper, who had been standing silently beside Grace, his body radiating a protective warmth, let out a low, menacing growl that rumbled deep in his chest. He moved to position himself squarely between Victor and the unconscious child, his powerful shoulders bunched, his lips drawing back to reveal a formidable array of white teeth. A silent, final warning. Then, Mrs. Gable, her face pale but her eyes shining with a newfound, astonishing courage, straightened her small, stooped shoulders, and I will testify to everything. Doctor, she declared, her voice trembling but clear and strong. Everything Mr. Beaumont has done to little Grace, from the day her dear mother passed until this very night. I cannot remain silent any longer. I will not. The storm still raged outside, the wind shrieking like a banshee, the rain hammering against the ancient stone walls of the manor, a wild, elemental reflection of the human chaos unfolding within the dark, cold confines of the storeroom. Victor Beaumont stood stunned, momentarily speechless. For the first time in his arrogant, self-assured life, he felt the bedrock of his absolute power, his unquestioned authority within his own domain, being openly, forcefully, and simultaneously challenged from multiple fronts. A flicker of something unfamiliar. Was it fear? The fear of exposure, of scandal, of his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Danced in his usually impervious eyes, Grace's fate, a tiny, flickering candle flame in the heart of the raging storm, hung precariously in the balance, utterly dependent on the next, crucial decision of the flawed, frightened, and finally, courageous adults arrayed before her unseeing eyes. The air in the cramped, damp storeroom still thrummed with the volatile energy of the confrontation. Victor Beaumont, his face a mask of incredulous rage and dawning, unfamiliar fear, stared at the resolute doctor, the unexpectedly defiant housekeeper, and the menacingly protective Rottweiler. The triple-fronted assault on his authority was unprecedented. Unthinkable. The threat of police, of public scandal, of his meticulously crafted facade being torn to shreds, was a cold knot tightening in his gut. For a moment, he seemed to swell, ready to unleash another torrent of fury. But Dr. Anderson's steady, unwavering gaze and the almost imperceptible tightening of Cooper's jaw muscles as he emitted another low, warning rumble gave him pause. The potential cost of further resistance, he calculated with a speed born of self-preservation, was suddenly, alarmingly, too high. He drew himself up, attempting to regain some semblance of his shattered composure, his voice a low, guttural growl. Fine, he spat, the word laced with venom and barely concealed humiliation. Take her. Do whatever you deem necessary. But don't you dare bother me with this triviality again. I am far too occupied with multi-million-dollar projects, with matters of actual consequence, to be concerned with such insignificant domestic disturbances. He turned his back on them then, a gesture of supreme, contemptuous dismissal. But as he strode from the storeroom, Mrs. Gable caught the flicker of raw panic in his eyes before he disappeared into the shadowy depths of the manor. The fear was real. With Victor's grudging, coerced consent, Doctors Anderson and Mrs. Gable moved with swift, desperate urgency. The doctor had, with remarkable foresight and a deep understanding of Victor's probable reactions, already discreetly summoned an ambulance when he'd first agreed to come to the manor, instructing them to wait at a nearby, inconspicuous side road. A quick call now brought them speeding up the long, rain-swept driveway, their sirens, blessedly, silent until they were closer to the main road. Grace, still lost in the throes of her delirium, was a fragile, terrifyingly light burden as the uniformed paramedics, their faces professionally calm, but their eyes betraying concern, gently but quickly transferred her to a waiting stretcher. She was still muttering, her small, chapped lips forming incoherent words, her body occasionally twitching with a violent shiver despite the heavy blankets they wrapped around her. As they maneuvered the stretcher towards the ambulance, Cooper, who had not left her side for an instant, made a sudden, determined leap. With surprising agility for his size, he vaulted into the back of the vehicle just as the doors were about to close. Landing with a soft thud beside the stretcher, he immediately lay down, his large body a warm, protective barrier, and began to whine softly, nuzzling his broad, wet nose insistently into Grace's cold, limp hand. No one had the heart or the authority to remove him. The ambulance doors slammed shut, a final, definitive sound. Inside, amidst the hum of medical equipment and the rhythmic hiss of oxygen, the vehicle sped through the stormy night, its emergency lights painting fleeting, ghostly streaks of red and blue across the rain-lashed trees lining the driveway. As the siren finally wailed to life, cleaving the darkness, Grace's eyelids fluttered. She stirred, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, her breath a shallow, ragged whisper. "Cooper?" The name was a faint sigh, a ghost of a sound, lost in the cacophony of the siren and the storm. But the Rottweiler, his senses attuned to her every nuance, heard it. He pressed closer, his head resting on the edge of the stretcher, his warm breath caressing her cold cheek, his presence a steadfast, unwavering reassurance in the terrifyingst, disorienting chaos. Back at Beaumont Manor, a different kind of storm was just beginning to break for its master. The moment Dr. Anderson had seen Grace stabilized in the emergency room of the county hospital, her breathing assisted, an IV line delivering vital fluids and antibiotics into her thin arm, he made another series of calls. The first was to the local Child Protective Services hotline. His voice, calm but firm, detailed the events of the night. His medical assessment of Grace's condition, a damning indictment of prolonged neglect and abuse. He promised a full written report and all necessary medical documentation. Mrs. Gable, her face pale but her eyes shining with a quiet, fierce determination, made her own decision that night. As soon as she was sure Grace was in capable hands and that Dr. Anderson had set the wheels of officialdom in motion, she returned to Beaumont Manor only long enough to pack a small, worn suitcase containing her few belongings. She left without a word to Victor, her resignation unspoken but absolute. The following morning, she presented herself at the Child Protective Services office, volunteering to cooperate fully with their investigation. Her testimony, delivered with a raw, heart-wrenching emotion that left the seasoned social worker assigned to the case visibly moved, painted a vivid, horrifying picture of Grace's daily existence. The relentless chores, the verbal abuse, the calculated starvation, the terror of the back room. She also voiced her long-held, deeply troubling suspicions about the circumstances surrounding Eleanor Beaumont's untimely death years earlier, hinting at a pattern of Victor's cold, controlling behavior and his callous disregard for his wife's declining health. Her words, meticulously recorded, added significant weight to the burgeoning case against Victor Beaumont. An official, high-priority investigation was launched with surprising speed. Victor Beaumont, much to his indignant disbelief, was formally summoned for questioning. The news, despite Victor's desperate attempts to contain it, began to seep out, first as hushed whispers amongst the Beaumont Manor staff, then as veiled rumors in the exclusive, gossipy circles of the local elite, and finally, inevitably, as salacious hints in the less reputable corners of the press. The carefully constructed edifice of Victor Beaumont's public persona, the philanthropic business magnate, the pillar of the community, began to show alarming cracks. Business associates, men who had once eagerly courted his favor and basked in his reflected power, suddenly became unavailable. Calls went unreturned. Meetings were indefinitely postponed. Several lucrative, high-profile contracts, vital to the continued expansion of his already teetering financial empire, were abruptly suspended pending further review, or quietly canceled altogether, citing vague, unrelated concerns. The chilling touch of financial pressure, a sensation Victor Beaumont had not experienced in decades, began to make its unwelcome presence felt. He reacted with predictable fury and arrogance, attempting to leverage his considerable wealth and his network of powerful, albeit now increasingly reluctant, connections to quash the investigation, to silence the whispers, to make the entire unpleasantness simply disappear. He instructed his high-priced legal team to handle it, to discredit the witnesses, to find loopholes, to bury the problem under a mountain of money and influence. There were even veiled attempts to intimidate potential witnesses, subtle threats delivered through third parties. But the medical evidence from the hospital was irrefutable, a stark, clinical testament to Grace's suffering, and Mrs. Gable's detailed, unwavering testimony, corroborated by Dr. Anderson's professional account, proved to be a formidable, unshakable bulwark against his manipulations. His lead attorney, a usually unflappable man named Davenport, called him late one evening, his voice strained with uncharacteristic anxiety. "Mr. Beaumont," he began, dispensing with his usual obsequious pleasantries, "I regret to inform you that the situation is considerably more precarious than we initially anticipated. Mrs. Gable's testimony is proving to be extraordinarily compelling, and Dr. Anderson is a highly respected figure, combined with the hospital's medical records. Frankly, sir, this is shaping up to be a public relations and legal nightmare. The DA's office is taking this very seriously. This could potentially destroy your reputation, and quite possibly your entire career." Victor, a half-empty bottle of scotch at his elbow, merely snarled into the receiver, "Destroy me. Don't be a fool. Davenport, I am this county. You will shut your mouth and find a way to make this go away. That's what I pay you obscenely well for, isn't it? Not to listen to your pathetic, cowardly whining." He slammed the phone down, the sound echoing the hollowness that was beginning to grow within him. Meanwhile, in the quiet, sterile environment of the county hospital, Grace slowly, painstakingly, began her long journey back from the brink. For days, she hovered between life and death, the pneumonia raging through her weakened body. But under the dedicated, round-the-clock care of the hospital staff, fortified by antibiotics and proper nutrition, the fever finally began to recede. Her breathing gradually eased, and the spark of life in her, though still faint, began to glow a little brighter. Her small body remained incredibly weak, the long months of starvation and abuse having taken a severe toll. Dr. Anderson, using his considerable influence, had made special arrangements for Cooper. The Rottweiler was permitted to stay in a quiet, secluded utility room just off the pediatric wing. Each day, Mrs. Gable, who had found temporary lodging with a distant cousin in town, would arrive faithfully to walk him. And then, with a gentle smile and a quiet word to the charge nurse, she would bring Cooper for a brief, precious visit to Grace's room, the sight of her beloved dog, his warm, solid presence beside her bed, his gentle nuzzling of her hand, was a medicine more potent than any drug. His presence was an anchor, a tangible link to a love that was pure and unconditional. Mrs. Gable herself was a constant, comforting presence. She would sit by Grace's bedside for hours, reading her fairy tales in a soft, soothing voice, her own past sorrows temporarily forgotten in her devotion to this small, wounded child. She brought bowls of warm, nourishing chicken soup she'd made herself, coaxing Grace to take a few spoonfuls, celebrating each tiny victory. For the first time in her conscious memory, Grace was experiencing what it felt like to be truly, unconditionally cared for, to feel the gentle, healing touch of human warmth without fear or expectation. A kind, soft-spoken social worker named Miss Albright began to visit Grace regularly. Initially, Grace was withdrawn, her eyes filled with a familiar, haunted fear, her answers to Miss Albright's gentle questions monosyllabic or non-existent. But slowly, patiently, with Cooper often lying quietly at the foot of her bed during their sessions, his presence a silent endorsement of trust, Grace began to open up, in broken, hesitant sentences, punctuated by tears and long silences. She began to recount the chilling tapestry of her life at Beaumont Manor, the small, everyday cruelties, the constant fear, the aching loneliness. The oppressive tension of the confrontation at the manor had gradually receded, replaced by the quiet, ordered rhythm of the hospital, the hushed efficiency of the medical staff, and the steady, parallel unfolding of the investigation into Victor Beaumont's affairs. Hope, a fragile, tender seedling, was beginning to push its way through the barren, frozen ground of Grace's past. Her physical health was slowly, painstakingly improving, but the deeper wounds, the scars on her spirit, would require far more time and far more love to heal. Victor Beaumont, for so long the absolute, untouchable monarch of his own dark kingdom, now found himself facing the very real, very public threat of legal retribution and the ignominious collapse of the empire he had built on a foundation of ruthlessness and fear. A new future was dawning for Grace. Uncertain, yes, and undoubtedly challenging, but one that held the distinct, luminous promise of being irrevocably, blessedly different from the suffocating darkness of her past. The sterile, antiseptic scent of the county hospital room, once an oppressive reminder of Grace's desperate fight for life, slowly transformed into the aroma of sanctuary and healing. Weeks melted into a month, then stretched into 2, under the vigilant, meticulous care of the nursing staff, the unwavering medical guidance of Dr. Anderson, and the daily, sunbeam-like visits from a profoundly changed Mrs. Gable and a patiently devoted Cooper. Grace's physical strength began its slow, arduous return. The raging pneumonia, which had brought her to death's very door, finally receded under the onslaught of powerful antibiotics. The consuming fever broke for good, leaving her weak but lucid, and a fragile touch of healthy color began to bloom in her previously ashen, hollowed cheeks. The deep, racking cough that had once torn through her small frame, threatening to extinguish her flickering life flame, became less frequent, less violent, then blessedly disappeared almost entirely. But the path to true recovery, especially for the deep, invisible wounds etched upon her spirit by years of neglect and terror, was a much longer, more winding road. It was a truth universally acknowledged by all involved in her care that returning Grace to the cold, echoing emptiness and oppressive shadow of Beaumont Manor was not merely unthinkable, but an absolute impossibility. Dr. Anderson and his wife, Sarah, a woman whose warm smile and gentle demeanor radiated an almost palpable kindness, had begun visiting Grace regularly from the moment she was stable. Sarah, a retired kindergarten teacher with eyes that held a universe of patience and an intuitive understanding of childhood sorrows, would arrive with armfuls of brightly illustrated picture books, small, soft toys, and an endless supply of quiet, comforting stories. She would spend hours by Grace's bedside, her voice a soothing balm as she read aloud, her presence a calm, steady anchor in the child's still turbulent emotional seas. They saw in Grace not a shattered, broken child beyond repair, but a remarkably resilient little soul, a tiny, tenacious flower fighting its way towards the light, yearning for the simple, fundamental nourishment of safety, acceptance, and love. After several earnest discussions with Mrs. Albright, the compassionate and highly efficient social worker assigned to Grace's case, and once Grace was deemed physically well enough to be discharged from the hospital's direct care, the Andersons made a quiet, heartfelt decision that would forever alter the course of all their lives. They applied for, and were swiftly granted, temporary emergency foster care, with the clearly stated, unwavering intention of pursuing full legal adoption as soon as the courts would allow. One bright, sun-drenched afternoon, several weeks after Grace had come to live with them, Sarah Anderson sat beside her on a comfortable, floral-patterned sofa in the Andersons' cozy, book-filled sunroom. Sunlight streamed through the clean windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, golden sprites. Cooper, now a permanent and much-cherished member of this burgeoning family, lay contentedly at their feet, his broad head resting with a sigh on Grace's small, slippered feet. "Grace, dear," Sarah began, her voice soft as cashmere, her kind eyes filled with a deep, abiding tenderness as she took the child's small, still too thin, hand in hers. Dr. Anderson stood near the window, ostensibly examining a potted geranium, but his attention was wholly focused on the two figures on the sofa. "Dr. Anderson and we've been doing a lot of thinking and a lot of hoping, and well, sweetheart, we would be so very, very honored if you would consider becoming a true and permanent part of our family. If you would let us be your parents, not just in name, but in every way that matters." Grace's large, expressive eyes, which had slowly, painstakingly begun to shed some of their deeply ingrained, haunted shadows, widened almost comically. She looked from Sarah's gentle, expectant face to Dr. Anderson, who now turned from the window, his own face alight with a warm, encouraging smile. Her gaze then dropped to Cooper, who, as if sensing the monumental importance of the moment, thumped his thick tail softly, hopefully, against the worn rug. Tears, wholly unexpected, welled in her eyes, blurring her vision, but these were not the hot, terrified tears she had shed so often at Beaumont Manor. These were tears of stunned disbelief, of a fragile, almost unbearable, burgeoning hope. "You mean," she whispered, her voice trembling, so low it was almost lost in the quiet room. I can really stay here, with you, and with Dr. Anderson, and with Cooper, too, for always." Sarah's warm, radiant smile was all the answer she needed, a beacon of pure, unconditional love. "Yes, sweet girl, yes, forever and always, if you'll have us." Dr. Anderson nodded, his own eyes suspiciously bright, a lump forming in his throat. In that profound, life-altering moment, a tiny, hesitant smile, the first truly spontaneous, utterly joyful smile they had ever witnessed from her, lit up Grace's face. It was like watching a flower, long crushed and dormant beneath a cold, heavy stone, finally, miraculously, unfurl its delicate petals to embrace the warmth and light of the sun. Life in the Andersons' modest but love-suffused home was a daily revelation to Grace. It was a world governed by gentle routines, by patient understanding, by spontaneous warm hugs, and by laughter. So much easy, unforced laughter that it seemed to physically cleanse the lingering shadows from her soul. She was like a wilted, neglected seedling suddenly transplanted into rich, fertile, nurturing soil, slowly, miraculously, unfurling and blossoming into the vibrant child she was always meant to be. The haunted, fearful look in her eyes gradually faded, replaced by a shy, burgeoning curiosity, then a growing, quiet confidence. Her natural, childlike vivacity, so long and brutally suppressed, began to bubble joyfully to the surface. She started attending the local elementary school, a prospect that initially filled her with a paralyzing terror, but with the Andersons' gentle, unwavering encouragement and Cooper faithfully, proudly walking her to the school gate each morning and waiting with an almost clockwork patience for her return each afternoon, soon transformed into an exciting adventure. She made new friends, tentative at first. Then, with increasing assurance, she discovered a passion for drawing, her sketches often featuring a certain heroic Rottweiler, and her smile, once so rare, became a frequent, radiant visitor to her expressive face. One golden, late spring afternoon, what felt like a lifetime later, though it was only the following year, Grace sat with Cooper in the Andersons' sun-drenched backyard, a riot of bright, cheerful flowers, Sarah's pride and joy, nodding their heads in the gentle breeze. She was sketching intently in a large pad, her brow furrowed in happy concentration, a remarkably lifelike picture of Cooper, majestic and alert, taking shape beneath her increasingly skilled fingers. She paused, her head tilted, and looked at her loyal, devoted companion, now officially, legally, her very own beloved dog. "Thank you, Cooper," she whispered, leaning over to hug his strong, warm neck, burying her face in his familiar, comforting fur. "Thank you for everything. You're the best, the most wonderful, the bravest and truest friend in the whole wide world. You saved me, you know. You really, truly did." Cooper let out a soft, contented bark, his tail thumping a joyous, rhythmic tattoo against the soft grass as he nuzzled his great head into her lap. His devotion absolute, his love a palpable warmth, while Grace was slowly, surely, rebuilding her shattered life, brick by loving brick. The wheels of justice, though sometimes ponderous, were grinding inexorably, and with righteous determination, for Victor Beaumont. His parental rights to Grace were permanently and irrevocably terminated by the family court, a legal formality that merely underscored the profound emotional and moral reality of his unfitness. The subsequent criminal trial was a local sensation, its sordid details meticulously, and often luridly, covered by both regional and national press. Mrs. Gable's tearful, damning testimony, recounting years of first-hand observation of Victor's calculated cruelty and systematic neglect, was unshakable under cross-examination. Dr. Anderson provided a calm, dispassionate, and utterly professional account of Grace's critical medical condition upon her arrival at the hospital, his clinical observations painting a stark, undeniable picture of long-term abuse. Investigators from Child Protective Services presented their meticulously compiled findings, a chilling dossier of Grace's life under Victor's tyrannical rule. Victor Beaumont, arrogant, unrepentant, and seemingly incapable of genuine remorse, attempted to deny all charges, to shift blame, to portray himself as a misunderstood, firm but fair disciplinarian tragically maligned by circumstance. It's all a gross misunderstanding, a complete and utter fabrication concocted by disgruntled former employees and an overzealous or interfering doctor, he declared from the witness stand, his voice booming with a hollow echo of its old authority, though his eyes, for the first time, held a new, desperate, hunted glint. I always wanted what was ultimately best for the child. Sometimes, a certain degree of strictness is an unfortunate but necessary component of instilling proper values and discipline. But the mountain of evidence against him was overwhelming, irrefutable. The jury, after a relatively short deliberation, found him guilty on multiple felony counts of criminal neglect causing serious bodily harm and aggravated child abuse. The judge, in delivering the sentence, spoke with barely concealed contempt and revulsion of Victor's callousness, his profound betrayal of the most fundamental human and parental trust, and the lasting damage he had inflicted upon an innocent child. Victor Beaumont was sentenced to a lengthy, non-negotiable prison term. His vast, once unassailable business empire, already teetering under the weight of public scandal and deserting partners, collapsed spectacularly into ignominious bankruptcy. The newspapers had a field day. One particularly stark headline splashed across the front page above a grainy courtroom sketch of a visibly diminished, ashen-faced, head-bowed Victor Beaumont being led away in handcuffs, read simply, "Beaumont, the steep and inevitable price of callousness and absolute power." A tragedy of a family utterly shattered by one man's cruelty. He would live out his remaining days in the harsh, unforgiving, and deeply indifferent anonymity of a state penitentiary, stripped of his immense wealth, his formidable power, his carefully cultivated reputation, a forgotten, irrelevant man, consumed by his own impotent bitterness and the well-earned contempt of a world that had once, inexplicably, fawned at his feet. Many years drifted by, like leaves on an autumn wind. Grace, nurtured by the steadfast, unconditional love of the Andersons, blossomed into a remarkable, accomplished young woman, intelligent, articulate, deeply compassionate, and possessing a quiet, unshakable strength that had been forged, not broken, in the fires of her traumatic past. Inspired by the profound kindness that had literally saved her life, and by her adoptive father's unwavering example of principled care, she pursued a career in pediatric medicine, eventually specializing in childhood trauma care, determined to dedicate her life and her skills to helping other vulnerable, wounded children find their own paths to healing and hope. The once dreaded, imposing Beaumont Manor, after falling into significant disrepair and changing hands several times, its dark, whispered history making it an unsellable, brooding albatross around the neck of each successive owner, was eventually acquired by a forward-thinking, well-funded charitable foundation with a substantial anonymous donation, rumored by those in the know to be from Grace herself. Now a successful and respected physician, generously supplemented by a significant contribution from the Anderson family. The cold, oppressive, imposing edifice underwent a profound, symbolic transformation. Walls were torn down, not just physically, but metaphorically. Light, both literal and figurative, was let in. The entire estate was meticulously reimagined, lovingly reborn, on a bright, breezy, hope-filled autumn afternoon. A large, diverse crowd gathered on the newly landscaped, welcoming lawns for the official inauguration ceremony of the Grace and Cooper Hope Center, a unique, innovative, and much-needed facility dedicated to providing a safe, therapeutic, and nurturing haven for children who had suffered trauma, abuse, or neglect, a special, sun-filled wing of the center was also dedicated as a sanctuary for abandoned and rescued animals, particularly dogs, who would be trained, with patience and kindness, to serve as therapy companions for the resident children. Grace, now a poised, articulate, and strikingly beautiful woman in her late 20s, her eyes shining with a serene, compassionate light that seemed to illuminate everyone she met, stood at the polished wooden podium. Beside her, Cooper, now a venerable, silver-muzzled old gentleman, his great Rottweiler heart still fiercely loyal, his aging body still radiating a quiet dignity, sat with regal composure, his gaze fixed lovingly and proudly on her. I stand here today, not as a victim, but as a profoundly grateful survivor, Grace said, her voice clear and resonant, carrying with an unexpected power across the assembled guests, which included many former patients and their families. And I know, with every fiber of my being, with a certainty that has become the bedrock of my life, that even in the most profound, the most terrifying and seemingly impenetrable darkness, the tiny, resilient sparks of love, compassion, and hope can, and indeed do, endure. With nurturing, with courage, they can be fanned into a steady, unwavering flame that not only heals the deepest of wounds, but also illuminates the path forward for others who may still be lost in their own shadows. And I have also learned, she paused, her gaze falling with infinite tenderness on her old, steadfast friend, that sometimes our most powerful, most effective guardian angels don't necessarily come to us with feathered wings and celestial halos. Sometimes, her voice softened, thick with a lifetime of unspoken emotion, they come with 4 strong paws, a joyfully wagging tail, and a heart that overflows with an unwavering, unconditional, and utterly selfless loyalty. They come to us in the precious, irreplaceable form of a devoted, 4-legged friend, like my Cooper, my hero, who never once, not for a single moment, gave up on me. Cooper, as if understanding her every heartfelt word, let out a soft, affirmative bark, and a gentle, appreciative wave of warm, empathetic laughter rippled through the listening crowd. Dr. Anderson and a beaming, teary-eyed Mrs. Gable, now a cherished, honorary grandmother figure in Grace's and the Andersons' lives, watched from the front row, their hearts overflowing. It's truly a miracle, isn't it? Dr. Mrs. Gable whispered, dabbing at her eyes with a delicate lace handkerchief that Sarah had gifted her. All those dark, terrible years ago. Who could have possibly imagined such a beautiful outcome? The boundless, selfless love, even the unwavering devotion of a single loyal dog. It truly can change a single human destiny. And look now. Just look how that love has grown, how it continues to spread its wings, to heal and touch and uplift so many other precious, wounded little lives. The setting sun, as if bestowing a final benediction, cast a warm, breathtakingly golden glow over the entire scene, bathing the transformed manor, now a vibrant, bustling beacon of hope and renewal. In a radiant, ethereal light, Grace, surrounded by her loving adoptive family, her cherished friends, and her ever-faithful, beloved Cooper, and, yes, perhaps, one day in the not-too-distant future, a playful, clumsy Rottweiler pup, a new Cooper, to romp in the sun-dappled fields of the Hope Center and carry on the noble legacy of unwavering, healing companionship. Looked out at the hopeful faces before her, her own heart full, brimming with a quiet, unshakable joy that finally, definitively, and triumphantly overshadowed all the long, dark years of sorrow. The oppressive shadows of the past had truly, irrevocably receded, banished forever by the persistent, unwavering, courageous light of compassion, resilience, and love This was not merely the end of a devastating storm. It was the radiant, undeniable, and enduring promise of a brand new dawn, a profound and moving testament to the incredible, indomitable resilience of the human spirit and the extraordinary, life-altering, redemptive power of love in all its sacred, multifaceted, and infinitely healing forms, a love that whispered with unshakable conviction of countless brighter, more hopeful tomorrows for all. What did this story make you feel? I'd truly love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and tell me what part stayed with you the most. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next one. Thank you so much for watching. And here's a little promise from me. To you, tomorrow's story will be a small gift, just for you. From the outside, the Beaumont estate was picture-perfect marble floors, manicured gardens, and a smiling man who seemed like the ideal father. But beneath all that, past the velvet curtains and polished smiles, was a basement no one talked about. And what happened there wasn't meant to be seen. Grace was only 7, small, delicate, with legs that needed therapy and a heart that needed warmth. Her mother believed she was in the best hands. After all, Victor bought her gifts, arranged physical therapy, even kissed her goodnight in front of others. But when her mother was gone, so was the kindness. He said it was for her own good mental toughness. Shock therapy. Character building. That's what he called it when he locked her in the basement and poured buckets of ice water over her shivering body. And when she tried to tell the truth, he smiled and said, "She imagines things." But Grace wasn't the only one locked up down there. She kept hearing something soft, scratching, quiet whimpers behind a door that was always bolted shut. And one day, when she was too weak to cry, the door finally opened. Victor had a new plan, a final lesson. He thought fear would break her. He thought hunger would turn the creature behind that door into a monster. What he didn't know was that some monsters are made by men, and some angels walk on 4 legs. What do you think really happened in that basement?